What happens when a war hero turns into a political whirlwind? A man who rises from poverty, but leaves the White House soaked in controversy? This is the story of Andrew Jackson, a president adored by the masses, yet feared by the elite. A fighter. A duelist. A slaveholder. A president who ruled with an iron fist and reshaped America forever. But at what cost? Welcome to Andrew Jackson and the 8-Year Reign of Terror, a gripping tale of power, populism, and the dark side of democracy. Get ready, because this is not the Andrew Jackson you read about in school. Part 1. The Rise of a Frontier Warrior. Before the White House, before the presidential portraits, there was a boy orphaned during the Revolutionary War. Andrew Jackson was just 13 when British soldiers slashed his face for refusing to polish an officer's boots. That scar? It never faded, physically or mentally. He grew up on the unforgiving American frontier, where law was flexible and violence was currency. Jackson learned early, survival meant strength. And when the War of 1812 came knocking, Jackson answered like a storm. The Battle of New Orleans turned him into a national hero. Old Hickory, they called him, tough as wood, unstoppable, unbeatable. But behind the legend was a man who held grudges, challenged dozens to duels, and once killed a man for insulting his wife. This was not a gentleman of refined politics. This was a force of nature. Part 2. Democracy's Dark Messiah. Jackson ran for president in 1824, and won the popular vote, but lost the presidency. What? Because of a shady deal in the House of Representatives that handed the office to John Quincy Adams. Jackson called it a corrupt bargain. And the people? They agreed. By 1828 he was back, with a vengeance. This time, Jackson unleashed one of the dirtiest, most brutal presidential campaigns in history. He was painted as a savage. He painted Adams as an aristocratic pervert. It was pure chaos, and pure populism. He won. Decisively. And then the Reign of Terror began. Part 3. The Spoils System and the Death of Civility. Jackson came to Washington with a mission: destroy the political elite. Drain the swamp, before the term existed. He purged hundreds of government officials, replacing them with loyalists. Competence? Irrelevant. Loyalty was king. This was "to the victor belongs the spoils," a phrase that defined his administration. For Jackson, politics was war, and war demanded winners and losers. Critics called it a betrayal of democracy. Jackson didn't care. He saw himself as the voice of the people, the only one that mattered. Part 4. The Indian Removal Act, a national tragedy. In 1830, Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, one of the darkest decisions in American history. It gave the federal government power to uproot Native American tribes from their ancestral lands in the Southeast and move them west of the Mississippi River. Jackson justified it as progress. He claimed it would save the native peoples from extinction. But in truth, it was a land grab driven by greed and racism. The Trail of Tears followed, a forced march of over 60,000 Native Americans. Thousands died from hunger, disease, and exposure. Entire nations, like the Cherokee, were ripped from the soil of their ancestors. And Jackson? He ignored the Supreme Court when it ruled in favor of the tribes. He famously quipped, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." The president had defied the judiciary, and gotten away with it. Part 5. The War on the Bank, King Jackson versus the moneyed elite. Jackson saw the Second Bank of the United States as a monster, a tool of the rich to enslave the common man. So he declared war on it. When Congress renewed the bank's charter, Jackson vetoed it. Not because it was unconstitutional, but because he simply didn't like it. He pulled federal funds from the bank, scattering them into state banks, called pet banks, causing a wave of speculative investment and economic instability. It was financial chaos masked as democratic victory. His enemies called him King Andrew I. Cartoons depicted him wearing a crown, trampling the Constitution. Jackson loved it. He believed the people, not banks, not judges, not elites, should rule. Even if that meant burning the system down. Part 6. Nullification Crisis, the Union under siege. But Jackson's war wasn't just with banks, it was also with the very idea of disunion. When South Carolina threatened to nullify federal tariffs, and hinted at secession, Jackson responded like a general, not a president. He sent warships to Charleston. He prepared the army for action. He told the South, "Try me." This time it worked. South Carolina backed down, barely. But the seeds of civil war had been planted. Jackson had preserved the Union, but exposed just how fragile it was. Part 7. The Panic of 1837, Jackson's economic time bomb. Though Jackson had left office in 1837, the aftershocks of his decisions detonated almost immediately. With the destruction of the National Bank and the rise of Jackson's pet banks, America's economy had become a wild west of unchecked speculation. Easy loans flooded the market. Land sales exploded. And then, Jackson dropped the hammer. In 1836, he issued the Specie Circular, a rule demanding that all land purchases be made in gold or silver, not paper money. The move was meant to stabilize the economy. Instead, it smashed it. Confidence collapsed. Banks failed. Credit vanished. Businesses shuttered. People panicked. Though the economic disaster struck under his successor, Martin Van Buren, there was no doubt where the fuse had been lit: Jackson's White House. As unemployment soared and riots erupted in major cities, Jackson, now retired, watched from his Tennessee estate, unbothered. He believed he had saved the republic even if it meant some suffering along the way. To him, pain was temporary. Power to the people was eternal. Part 8. Jackson the Enigma, Hero or Tyrant? Andrew Jackson left behind a nation forever changed. He was the first true outsider president, a man who spoke directly to the people, bypassing institutions he saw as corrupt or elitist. He expanded presidential power to levels never before seen. He ignored the courts. He ignored Congress. At times, he even ignored the Constitution. To his followers, Jackson was a messiah of democracy, a champion of the poor, a slayer of monopolies and aristocrats. To his enemies, he was a tyrant in civilian clothes, a dictator masquerading as a democrat. He was also deeply flawed, a slaveholder who owned hundreds of human beings, a president who exiled entire nations from their homelands, a man who wielded violence and fear as tools of governance. Yet, paradoxically, his face still sits on the $20 bill. His legacy is not clean. It is not neat. But it is inescapable. Part 9. The Age of Jackson, a Lasting Influence. Even after his death in 1845, Jackson's spirit haunted American politics. He had reshaped the presidency into a weapon of the people, or, more accurately, a weapon in the hands of a populist. Future presidents would borrow his playbook, especially those who sought to bypass checks and balances in favor of the will of the people. From Theodore Roosevelt to Donald Trump, Jackson's populist rage, fiery nationalism, and distrust of elites would become a recurring theme in American life. His Democratic Party, founded by Jackson himself, would evolve, fracture, and reshape countless times, but its DNA still carries his name. Part 10. The Legacy of the Reign. So, was Andrew Jackson's 8-year rule a reign of terror, or the birth of modern democracy? That depends on whom you ask. Ask a Cherokee elder, and they may speak of genocide. Ask a working-class voter in 1830, and they might describe a savior. Ask a constitutional scholar, and they may point to authoritarianism cloaked in patriotism. One thing is certain: Jackson's America was louder, messier, and more violent, because he made it so. He brought power to the people. And he showed how easily that power could be turned into a storm. Part 11. Jackson's Private Life, Behind the General's Gaze. Behind Jackson's piercing eyes and battlefield bravado was a man scarred by loss, suspicion, and obsession with honor. His relationship with Rachel Donaldson, his beloved wife, was both passionate and tragic. When they first met, Rachel was trapped in an unhappy marriage. She believed she had secured a legal divorce, but the papers were not finalized. Her marriage to Jackson, technically bigamous, became a weapon for his political enemies. They called her an adulteress, a whore, a disgrace to the nation. The attacks devastated Rachel. Just weeks after Jackson's election victory in 1828, she collapsed and died from a heart attack. Jackson never forgave those who smeared her name. At her funeral, he stood over her grave and swore, "May God Almighty forgive her murderers." I never can. That fury never left him. Every enemy, every critic, to Jackson they weren't just opponents. They were threats to the memory of the woman he loved. Part 12. Blood on the Grounds, Duels, Vengeance, and Jackson's Code. Andrew Jackson fought in over a dozen duels, not metaphorical ones but actual life-and-death shootouts over insults, honor, and pride. In one infamous duel with Charles Dickinson, Jackson was shot in the chest. The bullet lodged so close to his heart that it could never be removed. Despite the wound, Jackson stood his ground, raised his pistol, and killed Dickinson where he stood. These weren't exceptions. This was Jackson. He carried bullets in his body for the rest of his life, from battlefields and from duels alike. Each one a reminder of how personal politics and honor were to him. Jackson's America wasn't run by lawyers and laws. It was ruled by grit, guts, and the gun. Part 13. The Enemy Within, Jackson versus Abolitionists. Jackson was no quiet slaveholder. He owned over 150 slaves across his plantations. He used their labor to build his fortune and his political empire. But it wasn't enough to own slaves. Jackson hunted abolitionists. In the 1830s, as the anti-slavery movement began to stir in the North, Jackson viewed them as dangerous subversives, people trying to tear the country apart. When abolitionists began mailing anti-slavery pamphlets to the South, Jackson called it a vile attempt to poison the minds of our youth. He ordered his postmaster general to intercept and destroy the mailings. To Jackson, liberty had limits. And black freedom was not part of the vision. This wasn't just political calculation. It was belief. He saw slavery as natural, and abolitionism as treason. Part 14. Death and Immortality, The Final Days. Jackson died on June 8, 1845, at his beloved Hermitage estate in Tennessee. He was 78, old, sick, and still carrying bullets inside him. His last words? "I hope to meet each of you in heaven. Be good children, all of you, and strive to be ready when the change comes." He left behind not just a divided country but a blueprint. A blueprint for populism. For power unchecked. For a presidency fueled by will, not law. Even in death, Jackson did not rest. His ghost would return in every political firestorm that challenged the balance between democracy and authority. Part 15. The Echo of a Tyrant, The Shadow of a Hero. Today, Andrew Jackson is a paradox carved in stone and paper. His face remains on the $20 bill, though campaigns continue to remove it. His home, the Hermitage, is a museum, part shrine, part scar. His presidency shaped the modern office, stronger, louder, more personal. But so did his cruelty. He gave voice to the voiceless, while silencing others forever. He broke the elite, but replaced it with a different kind of tyranny. He was loved fiercely, and feared even more. In many ways, Jackson didn't just govern America. He became it. The light and the dark. The promise and the punishment. The dream and the nightmare.